A young waiter pays the bill for a poor elderly man and is fired by the restaurant owner. Minutes later, the elderly man's wife arrives, and everyone is frozen in shock when they realize who she is. In a quiet corner of a modest neighborhood, a small restaurant hummed with the mundane buzz of everyday life. The clattering of dishes, the murmur of conversations, and the familiar scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Among the hustle, a young waiter, who had worked there for years, moved from table to table, his demeanor marked by politeness and a subtle warmth. He wasn't wealthy by any means, but he took pride in treating everyone with respect. This particular afternoon seemed no different from the rest, until a figure appeared at the door. An elderly man, with humble clothes and a weathered face, walked in slowly, his eyes betraying a quiet desperation masked by a forced smile. He asked only for a cup of coffee. As the waiter served the coffee, he noticed the old man's trembling hands as he reached for his pocket. The few coins he laid on the table weren't enough to cover the cost, and the man's face flushed with quiet embarrassment. The young waiter, without hesitating, stepped forward, quietly slipping his own money into the bill to cover the difference. He made it seem as though nothing had happened, not wanting to embarrass the man further. To the waiter, it was a small gesture, something he could easily overlook. But as the old man realized what had happened, a deep gratitude filled his eyes. He smiled, his weathered face lighting up in a way that struck the waiter. The old man thanked the young waiter softly, his voice filled with emotion. There was something more in his words, a weight that the waiter didn't fully understand at the moment. "You have a good heart," the old man said, his voice trembling with sincerity. "It's not every day you meet someone like you." The waiter simply smiled back, brushing off the compliment with a modest nod. But as the old man left the restaurant, something about the encounter lingered in the air. It was as if the simplicity of the act had opened a door to something far greater than either of them could anticipate. As the old man walked out of the restaurant, his back hunched slightly with the burden of age, the young waiter couldn't help but feel a strange sensation. It wasn't regret, but a peculiar sense of anticipation, as though something significant had just begun. The air felt different, heavy with the unspoken. He watched the man disappear down the street, wondering what had led him to that moment and what kind of life he had lived. Yet, the waiter didn't dwell too long on it. He had customers to attend to, and life in the restaurant carried on as usual. At least for now. The atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift after the old man's departure. The other customers continued their conversations, oblivious to what had just transpired, but the waiter felt a strange energy in the room. As he cleared the empty cup from the table, the old man's words echoed in his mind. "It's not every day you meet someone like you." What had he meant by that? Was it just a kind remark, or did it carry a deeper meaning? The waiter shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought, but the feeling stayed with him. Something was different now, though he couldn't quite place it. Later that evening, as the waiter finished his shift, he found himself reflecting on the day's events. It was a simple gesture, just paying for someone's coffee, but it felt more significant than he could explain. He wondered if the old man had meant something more with his enigmatic smile and words. The nagging sense of curiosity followed the waiter home that night. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story, that somehow, his small act of kindness would ripple into something larger. Little did he know, he was about to be proven right. The next morning, the young waiter returned to work, but the atmosphere felt different. He went through the motions of his usual routine, greeting customers, serving food, and cleaning tables, yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the old man. Why had that moment struck him so deeply? He had done kind things before, helped customers, smiled through tough shifts, but this felt heavier, as if it had set something into motion. The memory of the old man's expression, a mix of gratitude and something else, something unspoken, refused to fade. Hours passed, and the waiter couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The restaurant, typically lively with regulars and casual diners, seemed quieter today, as though it too sensed the shift. His coworkers noticed his distraction, but no one asked. They were used to his contemplative nature. Yet, as the day wore on, he kept looking toward the door, half expecting the old man to return, to offer some kind of explanation for the strange feeling that lingered in his chest. But the door remained still, and the day carried on. By the late afternoon, the young waiter had almost convinced himself that he was overthinking the whole thing. Life was full of fleeting moments, and not every one of them carried deep significance. Yet, just as he began to let it go, the memory of the old man's smile returned, this time with more force. It was a smile filled not just with gratitude, but with knowing, a kind of wisdom that only comes with age and experience. The waiter wondered if perhaps the old man had seen something in him that he hadn't yet seen in himself. The thought made his heart race. As the final customers began to leave, the waiter closed out his shift and prepared to head home. His steps were slower than usual, his mind clouded with the possibilities of what that day had meant. His heart, however, still held onto a small hope that whatever had begun with that act of kindness was not yet over. The restaurant lights dimmed behind him as he locked the door, casting long shadows across the street. The night felt full of unanswered questions, as if the world was waiting to reveal its next move. But for now, the waiter could only wait and wonder. Shortly after the old man left the restaurant, the news of what the young waiter had done quickly reached the ears of the restaurant owner. The owner, a stern man known for being strictly business-minded, did not see the act of kindness in the same light as the young waiter. In his eyes, covering the old man's coffee was not an act of compassion, but an act of foolishness that cost the restaurant money. His face grew red with anger as he demanded an explanation from the waiter, calling him into his office with an air of frustration that hung thick in the room. The waiter, standing nervously before the owner, tried to explain that he only wanted to help the old man, that it was a small amount and no big deal. But the owner's mind was set. To him, the loss of even a single cent was a betrayal of trust, and he saw the waiter's actions as an unacceptable breach of his authority. "You don't pay the bills here," the owner said coldly, "and it's not your place to make those decisions." The young waiter, his heart pounding, tried again to reason with him, but the owner's expression remained unmoved, like stone. Before the waiter could even process what was happening, the words fell harshly from the owner's lips, "You're fired." The shock hit the young man like a wave, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. Fired? Over a cup of coffee? It didn't seem real. He had worked there for years, building relationships with the regulars, treating the restaurant like his second home. And now, in an instant, it was all being taken away from him. His eyes stung with disbelief, but he kept his composure, quietly gathering his things as the other staff watched in silence. As he left the restaurant, the weight of his situation finally settled in. The streets that had once felt familiar and comforting now seemed cold and unwelcoming. The young waiter's thoughts raced as he walked, his heart heavy with the sting of injustice. How could an act of kindness lead to this? He had only wanted to help, to make someone's day a little brighter. And now, he had lost his job, his sense of purpose, and the place he had come to love. The world felt unfair, as if the universe had turned its back on him in the cruelest of ways. Despite his feelings of hurt and anger, the image of the old man lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the thought that the encounter wasn't over, that there was something more to come. His act of kindness had felt right in the moment, and though the consequences were painful, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Deep down, he sensed that this wasn't the end of the story. The old man's enigmatic smile and those final words of gratitude played over and over in his head, leaving the young waiter with a strange sense of anticipation, as though the universe was waiting to reveal its next move. Hours passed as the young man wandered aimlessly through the streets, trying to make sense of what had happened. He replayed the conversation with the owner in his mind, wishing he had said more, stood up for himself. But in that moment, the shock had stolen his words, leaving him powerless to defend his actions. Now, as the cold evening air wrapped around him, he wondered what he would do next. He had no other job lined up, no savings to fall back on. The weight of his future pressed down on him, heavy and uncertain. As the night deepened, the young waiter found himself sitting on a park bench, staring out into the dark. The city buzzed around him, oblivious to his turmoil. In the quiet, he allowed himself to feel the full extent of his despair. Tears welled in his eyes as the reality of his situation sank in. He had always believed in kindness, in doing what was right, even when it wasn't easy. But now, he wondered if the world cared at all. Maybe the owner was right. Maybe kindness didn't matter in a world driven by profit and power. The thought made his heart ache. Yet, even in the depths of his sorrow, a small voice within him refused to let go of hope. He remembered the old man's face, the way his eyes had sparkled with gratitude, the softness of his smile. That moment had been real, and it had mattered. The young waiter clung to that memory as a lifeline, reminding himself that there was still good in the world, even if it wasn't always rewarded. As the night wore on, he resolved to keep moving forward, though he had no idea where the road would lead. The future was uncertain, but something told him that this chapter of his life was far from over. Just as the young waiter began to accept his fate, a strange feeling crept into his heart, a sense that he wasn't alone in this struggle. Though he had lost his job, though he had been treated unfairly, he wasn't ready to give up. The memory of the old man's quiet gratitude gave him strength. He didn't know what was coming next, but he felt in his bones that something was on the horizon. Perhaps this moment of loss would lead to something greater, something unexpected. And with that thought, a flicker of hope sparked within him, guiding him through the darkness. Not long after the young waiter's departure, the calm atmosphere of the restaurant was shattered by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. The door creaked open, and in walked a woman whose elegance and presence immediately commanded attention. She wasn't dressed extravagantly, but there was something about her posture and the way she carried herself that made everyone stop and stare. Her eyes swept over the room, sharp and observant, as if she was searching for something or someone. The restaurant, once filled with casual chatter, fell into a hushed silence as she approached the counter. She asked for her husband, her voice calm but firm. The description she gave left no doubt. She was speaking of the humble old man who had sat quietly at a table not long before, the very man the young waiter had helped. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. They stumbled through their words, explaining that he had left after finishing his coffee. But as they fumbled with their explanation, it became clear that the woman already knew more than they were telling. There was an air of certainty in her demeanor, as though she had anticipated every detail before stepping through the door. The tension in the room rose as the woman's gaze fell on the restaurant owner. Without missing a beat, she requested to speak with him privately. Her tone left no room for negotiation, and though the owner was known for his tough, unyielding nature, even he seemed taken aback by her authoritative presence. He hesitated for a moment, clearly unsettled, but eventually nodded and led her to a quieter corner of the restaurant. The employees exchanged nervous whispers, unsure of what was about to unfold. Something about this woman felt different, like she was carrying the weight of a story they had yet to hear. As the conversation began, the employees tried to busy themselves with their tasks, but it was impossible to ignore the palpable tension in the air. The woman's voice, though quiet, carried an undeniable power. She spoke with precision and confidence, her words measured but impactful. The restaurant owner, usually so sure of himself, now found himself on the defensive, trying to explain what had happened. He detailed the incident with the old man, mentioning the young waiter's dismissal. But as he spoke, the woman remained unerringly calm, her expression unreadable, like she was waiting for him to finish before revealing something that would change everything. When the woman finally spoke again, her words were laced with a quiet intensity. She explained, in no uncertain terms, that her husband was no ordinary man. He had deliberately chosen to present himself as someone humble and unassuming, seeking a place where he could observe the true nature of people without the influence of his reputation. Her revelation landed like a bombshell. The old man, who had appeared so simple and unremarkable, was, in fact, a person of great importance. His name, she said, carried weight and respect within the community. something that the restaurant owner had completely overlooked in his haste to dismiss the young waiter's kindness. The restaurant owner's face drained of color as the full weight of her words settled in. He had fired the young waiter over a cup of coffee, without realizing that the old man was someone who could have easily afforded 100 cups. But the issue wasn't money, it was humanity. The woman's words forced him to confront the uncomfortable truth that he had judged the situation entirely through the lens of profit and loss, blind to the deeper significance of what had occurred. He began to stammer, trying to justify his actions, but there was no escaping the fact that he had made a grave mistake. As the gravity of the situation became clear, the restaurant owner found himself at a loss for words. He had always prided himself on running a tight ship, but in this moment, he realized that his rigid rules and cold demeanor had blinded him to the more important aspects of life: compassion, kindness, and understanding. The woman's revelation had shaken him to his core, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. This wasn't just about a cup of coffee or a fired employee. It was about something far more profound. The owner's heart began to crack under the pressure of his own self-reflection. As the conversation continued, the woman's calm yet authoritative demeanor made it clear that she was not there for confrontation, but rather to reveal a deeper truth. Her husband, she explained, had not come to the restaurant by chance. He had chosen this place specifically because he wanted to see how people would treat someone who appeared to have little. The young waiter had passed the test with flying colors, showing compassion without expecting anything in return. The restaurant owner, on the other hand, had failed miserably, prioritizing profit over humanity. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and everyone in the restaurant could feel the shift. By the time the conversation drew to a close, it was clear that the restaurant would never be the same. The employees, who had been listening quietly from a distance, now realized that they had witnessed something extraordinary. This woman, with her quiet power and undeniable presence, had peeled back the layers of their daily lives to reveal the truth about who they really were. And as the restaurant owner sat in stunned silence, grappling with the implications of what had been said, the staff couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The day had begun like any other, but it was now clear that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The restaurant owner, still reeling from the woman's revelation, sat in stunned silence. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the gravity of what she had just told him. The old man, who had seemed so ordinary, was far from it. The woman had made it clear. Her husband was a figure of immense importance, a man whose name was respected and admired in the community. The owner's initial anger at the young waiter now felt petty and foolish. He had misjudged the situation entirely, focusing on the immediate loss of money rather than the deeper meaning of the young man's act of kindness. As the owner sat across from the woman, his thoughts shifted from disbelief to introspection. He had always prided himself on being a shrewd businessman, someone who ran a tight, no-nonsense operation. But now, faced with the consequences of his actions, he began to question the values that had guided him all these years. Had he become so consumed by profit and efficiency that he had lost sight of the human element? The young waiter had acted out of compassion, and in response, the owner had fired him without a second thought. The realization hit him hard, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his mistake. The woman's calm, unwavering demeanor only deepened the owner's sense of regret. She wasn't angry or confrontational. If anything, she seemed disappointed, as if she had expected better from him. Her husband had come to the restaurant seeking authenticity, a place where he could experience the genuine kindness of strangers. The young waiter had provided exactly that, offering help without expecting anything in return. But the owner, blinded by his rigid sense of order and control, had failed to see the beauty in that moment. He had punished the very thing that made his restaurant more than just a business: the human connection. The more the owner reflected, the more he realized how far he had strayed from the principles that had once guided him. He had opened the restaurant years ago with the dream of creating a welcoming space for the community, a place where people could gather, share a meal, and feel at home. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that vision. Profit margins, employee efficiency, and the constant pressure to succeed had hardened him, turning him into someone who valued numbers over people. And now, sitting across from this woman, he couldn't deny the truth any longer. He had failed to uphold the values that mattered most. As the weight of his reflections settled in, the owner felt a deep sense of shame. He had fired the young waiter, a kind and honest employee, without truly considering the impact of his decision. The woman's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that his actions had consequences far beyond what he had anticipated. The old man had been testing the world's kindness, and the owner had failed that test. The realization gnawed at him, leaving him with a hollow feeling in his chest. How could he have been so blind? And more importantly, how could he make it right? The restaurant, once bustling with energy, now felt eerily quiet. The employees, sensing the gravity of the situation, had retreated to the background, leaving the owner alone with his thoughts. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond to the woman's revelations. They had all witnessed his decision to fire the young waiter, and now they were watching him face the consequences of that choice. The air was thick with tension, and the owner knew that whatever he did next would define not only his relationship with his staff, but also the future of his restaurant. The woman's voice, steady and calm, broke the silence. "You have the chance to make this right," she said, her words carrying a weight that the owner couldn't ignore. "But it's not about money or apologies. It's about understanding the value of compassion, about recognizing that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have the greatest impact." Her words struck a chord deep within the owner. He had been so focused on running his business efficiently that he had forgotten the true reason he had opened it in the first place: to serve people, not just with food, but with warmth and care. As the conversation drew to a close, the owner felt a growing sense of responsibility. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could choose to act differently moving forward. The woman had given him the gift of clarity, showing him that his success wasn't measured by profits, but by the way he treated others. The young waiter's kindness had sparked something much larger than a single cup of coffee. It had forced the owner to confront his own values and make a choice about the kind of person and the kind of business he wanted to be. With a heavy heart, the owner promised the woman that he would make amends. He would find the young waiter and offer him not just his job back, but an apology, a genuine one, born from the realization that he had been wrong. The woman nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips, as if she knew that this moment had the power to change everything. As she stood to leave, the owner felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He had been given a second chance, but it was up to him to make the most of it. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. As soon as the woman left the restaurant, the owner wasted no time in taking action. The weight of guilt pressed heavily on him as he realized he had to make things right. His mind was racing with thoughts of the young waiter, the man he had fired without hesitation. The woman's words echoed in his ears, reminding him that it wasn't just about offering an apology, but about truly understanding the significance of what had happened. He had to find the waiter, not just to offer him his job back, but to make amends in a meaningful way. The urgency of the task at hand propelled him out the door, his heart pounding with both anxiety and hope. The city streets were busy, filled with the usual noise and activity, but the owner saw none of it. His focus was solely on finding the young man he had wronged. As he walked quickly through the neighborhood, his mind kept returning to the moment he had fired the waiter. He had acted so harshly, so quickly, without stopping to think about the consequences. Now, in the light of everything he had learned, his decision felt like a monumental mistake. He couldn't help but wonder if the waiter would even listen to him, if he would give him a chance to explain. Meanwhile, the young waiter had wandered far from the restaurant, his heart heavy with confusion and despair. He still couldn't quite believe what had happened. The job that had been his lifeline, his sense of stability, was gone in an instant, and all because he had tried to do the right thing. As he walked aimlessly through the streets, he wrestled with his emotions: anger, sadness, and a deep sense of injustice. He replayed the events of the day in his mind, wondering how a simple act of kindness had led to such a harsh punishment. He didn't know what to do next or where to turn. The waiter's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his phone buzzing in his pocket. It was a call from a coworker at the restaurant, someone who had always looked out for him. "You need to come back," his coworker said urgently. "The owner's looking for you. He wants to talk." The waiter felt a surge of confusion and frustration. Why would the owner want to talk to him now, after everything that had happened? The idea of going back to the place where he had been humiliated felt unbearable. Still, something in his gut told him to listen. Reluctantly, he agreed to return, though his heart was filled with doubt. The restaurant owner, growing more desperate with each passing moment, searched the streets for the young waiter. He knew he couldn't afford to waste any more time. He had to make this right, not just for the waiter, but for himself as well. The woman's visit had forced him to confront parts of himself that he had long ignored. His tendency to prioritize business over people, to act with cold efficiency rather than empathy. Now, the only thing that mattered was finding the waiter and showing him that he had learned from his mistake. He hoped it wasn't too late to set things right. When the owner finally spotted the young waiter in the distance, a wave of relief washed over him. He called out, his voice loud enough to cut through the noise of the street. The waiter turned, his face a mixture of surprise and apprehension. As the owner approached, his heart raced, unsure of how to begin the conversation. The waiter stood there, arms crossed, clearly guarded. "I don't know what you want from me," the young man said, his voice tinged with hurt and frustration. The owner swallowed hard, knowing that this conversation would not be easy. The owner took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I made a mistake, and I didn't realize it until it was too late. You did something kind, and I punished you for it. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of sincerity. The waiter looked at him, searching his face for signs of truth. The apology, while unexpected, didn't erase the hurt he had felt. "Why should I trust you?" the young man asked, his voice soft but firm. "You fired me without even listening. What's different now?" The owner nodded, understanding the young man's skepticism. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," he admitted. "But I've realized that I was so focused on the business that I forgot about the people who make it work. You showed compassion when no one was looking, and I failed to see that. I'm here now because I want to make it right, however I can." There was a long pause as the waiter considered his words. The anger and hurt were still there, but beneath them, he could sense the owner's genuine remorse. He had been waiting for something like this, though he hadn't expected it to come. The conversation continued, with the owner explaining how much the woman's visit had changed his perspective. He told the waiter about the true identity of the old man, about how his act of kindness had set off a chain of events that neither of them could have anticipated. As the waiter listened, something shifted within him. The anger that had gripped him began to loosen its hold. He didn't know if he was ready to forgive the owner entirely, but he could see that this moment wasn't just about an apology. It was about growth, about understanding, and about the possibility of moving forward. The air inside the restaurant was thick with anticipation as the young waiter returned, his footsteps hesitant but resolute. The familiar clinking of silverware and soft murmurs from customers filled the room, but the atmosphere felt different now. The other employees glanced at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern, sensing the importance of his return. The young man, still unsure of what to expect, walked slowly toward the back, where the restaurant owner and the elegant woman awaited him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but something deeper pulled him forward, the need for answers, for closure. As he entered the room, he was met with the warm, knowing smile of the woman who had started this entire chain of events. Her eyes sparkled with a quiet understanding, as if she could see the conflict within him. The owner, standing beside her, looked different now, less rigid, more human. There was a vulnerability in his expression that the waiter hadn't seen before. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension hung in the air like a heavy mist, and all the waiter could do was wait for someone else to break the silence. It was the woman who finally spoke, her voice soft yet powerful, cutting through the stillness. "You showed my husband a kindness that many people wouldn't have," the woman began, her gaze fixed on the young man. "And for that, I am grateful." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But what you didn't know was that my husband was not just any ordinary man. He came here to see the true nature of people, to be treated as anyone else would be." You passed that test, and your compassion was a gift." The waiter felt a strange mix of emotions: surprise, gratitude, and disbelief all swirling within him. He had never expected that his small act of kindness could carry such weight. Then, as if on cue, the old man himself appeared in the doorway, his humble appearance now infused with a quiet dignity that seemed to light up the room. The waiter's heart skipped a beat as their eyes met. The old man's smile was soft and full of warmth, the same expression he had worn that day when the young man had covered his coffee. But this time, there was something more, something deeper behind his eyes. "You reminded me," the old man said, his voice steady, "that there is still goodness in the world, that even in small places, in ordinary moments, we can find compassion and humanity." The waiter, overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, could only nod, his throat too tight with emotion to speak. The old man's words were a balm to his wounded pride and heart. The owner, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. His face, lined with the regret of his past actions, softened as he turned to the waiter. "I've been blind," the owner said, his voice filled with an earnestness that took the young man by surprise. "I was so focused on running this business, on keeping everything perfect, that I forgot what really matters. I see that now, thanks to you." The young man's breath caught in his chest as the owner extended his hand, a gesture of both apology and reconciliation. "I'm sorry," the owner continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I was wrong to fire you, and I can't undo that. But I'm asking for your forgiveness, and I'm offering you your job back, if you'll have it." The room fell silent again, every pair of eyes trained on the young man, waiting for his response. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the choice he had to make not just about his job, but about whether he could let go of the hurt and move forward. For a long moment, the waiter stood frozen, his thoughts swirling. The pain of being unjustly fired was still fresh, but standing before him was a man who was clearly changed, humbled by the events that had unfolded. The woman's words, the old man's gratitude, and now the owner's sincere apology, all of it pointed toward a path of healing. Slowly, he reached out and shook the owner's hand, a wave of relief and resolution washing over him. "I accept your apology," the young man said, his voice steady. "And I'll come back, but things need to be different. For everyone." The owner nodded, understanding the deeper message behind the words. This was not just about the young waiter's return. It was about transforming the way the restaurant was run, about creating an environment where compassion and humanity were prioritized over profit and efficiency. The tension that had gripped the room began to melt away, replaced by a sense of renewal. The employees, who had been watching from the sidelines, exchanged glances, sensing that this moment marked the beginning of something new. The restaurant, once a place of rigid rules and cold efficiency, was about to become something more, a place where kindness and connection thrived. As the scene unfolded, the old man and his wife exchanged a knowing look, their work here complete. They had come seeking truth, and in the end, they had found it, not just in the actions of the young waiter, but in the owner's transformation. They stood up to leave, but not without offering one final word of wisdom. "Remember," the old man said, his voice gentle but firm, "it's not the grand gestures that define us. It's the small moments of kindness, the choices we make when no one is watching. Those are the moments that matter most." With that, they turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a space forever changed. The restaurant, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now pulsed with a new energy. The young waiter, reinstated to his position, walked through the familiar space, but it felt different now, more alive, more welcoming. The employees greeted him with warm smiles, their respect for him heightened after witnessing everything that had unfolded. He had returned, but not just to the same role. The owner, in his apology and admission of fault, had offered him a higher position, one of leadership and responsibility, recognizing the integrity and kindness that had sparked such a profound change. The young man, while humbled by the promotion, was more focused on the deeper shift in the atmosphere. The cold, business-first mentality that had once defined the restaurant was gone, replaced by a sense of community and mutual respect. The owner, true to his word, had begun treating his staff with a new sense of compassion. No longer was the restaurant merely a place to make money. It had become a space where human connection was valued. The employees noticed the difference immediately, and the customers, though unaware of the full story, sensed something had changed as well. The entire place seemed to breathe easier. The young waiter's new role came with challenges, but he embraced them with a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just serving food. He was helping to foster an environment where people felt seen and appreciated. His fellow employees looked to him as an example, not just of hard work, but of what it meant to lead with empathy. Under his guidance, the team grew closer, more unified. The harsh, rigid rules that had once governed the restaurant were replaced with a focus on collaboration and mutual support. The change was palpable, and it resonated through every aspect of the restaurant's operation. As for the owner, he had undergone a transformation as well. The events of the past days had opened his eyes to what he had been missing, not just as a businessman, but as a person. He now took the time to engage with his employees, to understand their needs and concerns. He treated them not just as workers but as individuals, each with their own stories and struggles. This new approach changed the dynamic of the restaurant, and it wasn't long before the customers began to notice the difference too. The service felt warmer, the atmosphere more inviting, and people started coming not just for the food, but for the experience of being welcomed into something special. The elderly couple, who had been the catalyst for this transformation, had left the restaurant, but their presence was still felt. Their lesson, about the power of kindness and the importance of treating others with humanity, echoed through the walls of the place they had visited. The employees often spoke of them in hushed tones, marveling at how a simple cup of coffee had triggered such a profound change. The young waiter, in particular, held their words close to his heart. He understood now that small acts could ripple out in ways he could never have predicted. His life had been forever changed, not by grand gestures, but by a moment of compassion. As the days passed, the young waiter found himself reflecting often on the events that had led to this transformation. He realized that his journey wasn't just about getting his job back. It was about discovering what truly mattered to him. The sense of purpose that had always been just out of reach now felt solid and real. He knew that his role in the restaurant was no longer just about serving customers. It was about being a force for good, about creating a space where everyone, employees and customers alike, could feel valued. The restaurant had become a reflection of the values he held dear, and he was proud to be a part of it. Word of the restaurant's transformation began to spread throughout the neighborhood. People talked about the change in the air, how the place felt different now, warmer, more welcoming. Customers who had once been indifferent now lingered longer, chatting with the staff, enjoying the new sense of community that had taken root. The young waiter, though still modest, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. His small act of kindness had set off a chain reaction that had transformed not just the restaurant, but the people within it. The ripple effect was undeniable, and it continued to spread. The owner, for his part, had fully embraced the changes. He no longer saw the restaurant as just a business, but as a living, breathing entity that thrived on the connections between people. He had learned to listen, to empathize, and to lead with a sense of humility that had once been foreign to him. The transformation had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. He often thought back to the woman's words about the importance of compassion and humanity. Those words had reshaped not only his business, but his outlook on life. He was no longer just the owner of a restaurant. He was a part of a community. With the restaurant thriving under its new ethos, the young waiter found a new rhythm in his daily life. His responsibilities had increased, but so had his sense of fulfillment. Every day, he worked to ensure that the lessons he had learned were woven into the fabric of the restaurant. He led by example, showing his coworkers that kindness wasn't just an option, it was the foundation of everything they did. And as the restaurant continued to flourish, the young man knew that this was only the beginning. The story of his act of kindness had set something much larger in motion, and he was ready to see where it would lead next. In the quiet moments after the rush of the day, the young waiter often found himself reflecting on everything that had transpired. The restaurant, once just a place of work, had become something far more meaningful, a symbol of transformation and the power of small acts of kindness. As he stood behind the counter, Watching the last few customers leave for the night, he realized how much his life had changed since that fateful day when he had bought an old man a cup of coffee. What had seemed like such a small gesture had set off a chain of events that rippled through the lives of everyone around him, transforming not just the restaurant, but his own understanding of what truly mattered. He thought back to the old man's words about how the smallest acts could reveal the true nature of a person. In his moment of kindness, the young waiter had acted on instinct, not for recognition or reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. That choice, made in a heartbeat, had reshaped his world in ways he never could have imagined. It had revealed the depth of his character, shown him the value of empathy, and reminded him that even in a world often driven by profit and ambition, there was still room for humanity. The lesson wasn't lost on him. It was a part of him now, woven into the fabric of his daily life. The restaurant, too, had changed. The customers seemed to feel it, even if they didn't know the full story. There was a new warmth in the air, a sense of belonging that hadn't been there before. People lingered longer, conversations flowed more freely, and the staff worked with a sense of camaraderie that made the long hours feel lighter. The young waiter watched it all unfold with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that this was the result of something far greater than himself. It wasn't just about him, or the old man, or the owner. It was about how one small act could inspire others to be better, to care more deeply, and to see the world with kinder eyes. As the young waiter reflected on the past few weeks, he understood that the true value of his kindness wasn't in the praise or the promotion he had received. It was in the connections he had forged, the people he had touched, and the lessons he had learned. The restaurant had become a living testament to the power of empathy, and he felt proud to be a part of it. But more than that, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His role in the restaurant was no longer just about serving food. It was about creating a space where people could feel seen, heard, and cared for. It was about making the world a little brighter, one small act at a time. The transformation of the restaurant had reached far beyond its walls. Word had spread throughout the community, and people began coming not just for the food, but for the experience of being welcomed into a place that felt special. The young waiter had become a quiet symbol of integrity, someone who led not with authority, but with compassion. His fellow employees looked up to him, not because of his title, but because of the way he treated others, with respect, kindness, and humility. And though he had never sought the spotlight, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment in knowing that his actions had made a difference. Yet, despite all the changes, the young waiter remained humble. He knew that the lessons he had learned were not just for him. They were for everyone. He often thought about the old man and his wife, the quiet wisdom they had imparted, and the way they had silently guided him toward a deeper understanding of what it meant to live a meaningful life. Their visit had been brief, but the impact had been lasting. They had reminded him, and the entire restaurant, that the true measure of a person's worth was not in their wealth or status, but in their ability to show kindness to others, especially when it wasn't expected. As he locked up the restaurant for the night, the young waiter smiled to himself, knowing that this chapter of his life was only the beginning. The restaurant had been transformed, but so had he. He felt a sense of peace, a quiet confidence that he was on the right path. He knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him, guiding him through whatever challenges came next. And as he walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the old man, for the opportunity to make a difference, and for the chance to be a part of something bigger than himself. The world, he realized, was full of opportunities for kindness. Every day, in small, seemingly insignificant moments, there were chances to show compassion, to make someone's day a little better. And while not every act of kindness would spark the kind of transformation he had experienced, that didn't matter. What mattered was the act itself, the choice to do good even when no one was watching. That was the true value of kindness, not in the reward, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing you had made the world just a little bit better. And for the young waiter, that was enough. As he reflected on everything that had happened, the young waiter felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had taught him that kindness wasn't just about grand gestures or heroic acts. It was about the small moments, the quiet decisions that, over time, could change everything. And though the restaurant had become a symbol of that transformation, He knew that the lessons he had learned went far beyond its walls. He was ready for whatever came next, knowing that he would carry these lessons with him for the rest of his life, always striving to be a force for good in the world. What a journey it's been. But believe me, the story doesn't end here. There's another incredible story just waiting for you, right on your screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. It's filled with even more twists, emotions, and life-changing moments. If you've been captivated so far, the next one will leave you speechless. And before you go, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you can keep getting the best, most heartwarming stories delivered right to you. Let us know in the comments what you thought of this one. Your thoughts mean the world to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next unforgettable chapter.